Roth conversions. If you're watching this, you're probably thinking about one. If you're a pre-retiree and you've got between $3 and $4 million of tax-deferred money, this is probably something that's crossed your mind. I made this video for you. I want you to understand the pros and cons of making this decision and really take you under the hood and show you how I go about making this decision with clients as an advisor. I'm going to use a fictitious scenario. I've got Bob and Sue, and I'm going to walk you through why they should or should not convert using a common software in my practice. This is not personal, financial, tax, or investment advice. It's just meant to be educational for you. So if that's you and you've got a large tax-deferred account, this video is for you. Hey guys, here we have our tax planning software. And I like to use this when I'm thinking through a picture with clients of what would the lifetime tax liability look like for you based off your goals. Now, let me introduce you to the case of Bob and Sue. So Bob and Sue are currently 62 years old, and they both have decided, and we've gone through the planning process, just kind of assume for a second that we've already made this decision that at age 67, they're going to draw their Social Security. So I have the ability here to map out what the lifetime tax liability would look like for Bob and Sue. Now, in this case, they have $4 million of pre-tax assets. Now, if you're like me and you hear that, you're thinking, you have $4 million of pre-tax or tax-deferred assets, what could you possibly be concerned about? Well, the answer is Bob and Sue, the reason they got to $4 million, and this is a very common issue, is because they're really good savers. They're not spenders. And they have some kids. At this point, they think they're going to have grandkids coming along. And so this is about not just them, but it's about legacy. And so as I walk through this projection, I'm going to talk you through some things that you might want to be thinking about when it comes to, should I do a Roth conversion? If so, there's a lot of different considerations. So the big one for Bob and Sue, and we've kind of carefully brought this out of the planning process, is that they're not really worried about outliving their money. They're worried about leaving their money in a way that doesn't really do justice to how much they did save, meaning a lot of it's going to end up going to the government, and they'd rather pass it down really efficiently. So I want to just go through the assumptions of this plan first and then talk you through what they mean. So on the left here, I have the ability to put the joint filing status. In this case, they are married filing jointly. We have test client 1 and 2, Bob and Sue. And I've looked at their assets. So one thing you've got to realize is when it comes to doing a Roth conversion, you want to think about essentially what is it? It's taking pre-tax or tax-deferred assets. It's literally moving them from that status to a Roth IRA. So think traditional IRA to Roth IRA. Now the problem with that is it doesn't avoid taxes. I want to be very clear here. You're actually just taking your tax liability and eating it up front. Okay, so you're taking a big chunk out of that tax liability so that the lifetime tax is much lower. So the ability to do this is really predicated upon, do you have other assets? In this case, they have a taxable account at $500,000 on the left here. Another word for that is a brokerage account. So that account can be super helpful. So a lot of reasons why I tell people if they want to retire early, you need to have a brokerage account because they don't have to be penalized for accessing this along the way of their investing and saving journey, and it can be available in the event they want to do some Roth conversions. Now, why did I choose age 62 to 67 for this demonstration? Well, the answer is the best time to do Roth conversions is when you don't have extra income, meaning you have more say in how your income is generated. So in this case, with this taxable account here and not having Social Security, there's no pensions assumed, there's no annuity assumed, and they're very much easygoing people, meaning they only want to spend about $80,000 a year. And one of the spouses is actually working part-time between 62 to 67, and they're going to make $50,000. So really, there's only $30,000 that needs to come out of this massive portfolio, which leaves us a great time to consider something like a Roth conversion. So I'll walk you through down here on the left. So you have the client 1, that's going to be Bob. He's got a really big 401k rollover into an IRA, $3.5 million. Client 2, Sue, she's got a smaller account, but it's still tax deferred. That's how we make up our assets. I'm going to skip over the Roth conversions for now and before I show you what the adjustments are. Now the other thing on the left here is I have written tax adjusted assumption. So it says 24%. What does that actually mean? That actually means that when I'm showing you the difference between Roth and pre-tax, we want to show you apples to apples. So for example, if you have a $1 million Roth account and a $1 million pre-tax account, those are not equal. You have to take into account that 24% tax rate is going to apply to that $1 million. So that's what this basically does, is we make an assumption on when will that money be taken out at what tax rate and what is that actually equivalent to. So in this case, $1 million at 24% marginal tax bracket is the same as $760,000. So it's not the same, right? So you've got to give that away to taxes over time. I've got a rate of return assumed here. I have an inflation assumption. And I also have the spending. Now, I did say they're pretty frugal. They're going to spend $80,000. It's going to adjust for inflation. I do have a background calculation here for their Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. And that's going to come into play when we talk about IRMAA. So if you don't know what IRMAA is, this is income related monthly adjusted amount for Medicare premiums. So basically, Medicare every year is going to be based off what is your modified adjusted gross income, which is basically similar to adjusted gross income but adding in tax-free bond interest and a couple other things. But basically, if you're going to be doing Roth conversions, you're going to be having larger income in certain years. So you want to know if that impacts your Medicare premiums that you pay over time. So Medicare looks at the last 2 years tax return. So in the year 2025, I'm recording this, they're going to be looking at 2023 tax return and saying, did you make over a certain amount? If so, we're going to have an increase to your monthly Medicare amount. That really matters for people that are retired. So this is another aspect that we look at. I have an ability to look at life expectancy here. So in this case, life expectancy for both clients is 92. And I was able to put in their Social Security amounts. And again, that's going to vary by client. Now let's talk about Roth conversions. So this is, I'm modeling basically a 5-year window. And what we're doing is I can put up the Roth conversions, whatever amount I want in which year to have the most optimal outcome. So in this case, what I chose to do is model Roth conversions for these 5 years that will basically fill up the 32% tax bracket. So you can see there, that's $394,600 in 2025 for those married filing jointly. So if your adjusted gross income is at that or lower, that is going to be your marginal tax bracket. So just to kind of walk you through the colors here, we've got light green, which is the 22% bracket. We've got yellow, which is the 24% bracket, and then the next one up is that 32% bracket. So if you see these dark green bars, that is actually what has allowed me to fill up that 32% bracket. So I chose to do that for a 5-year period by doing a series of Roth conversions. But the trade-off there is, the reason that's helpful is if you follow the line past that year 2029, starting in year 2030, you're going to see a drastic reduction in the dark bars. That's because the ordinary income drops drastically, because when they are withdrawing their portfolio, it's going to be mostly Roth, and in this case it's going to be fairly even in terms of Roth and pre-tax. But the point is this: over the lifetime of their entire tax liability, you can see these lighter green is going to be well over that 24% tax bracket for a majority of their retirement, whereas if we do a Roth conversion, you see that it goes down to the 22, and it really follows and stays at or above the or below the 22 for some years. About 5, we bought ourselves about 5 years by doing that conversion. Then it slowly creeps up above, but it actually never reaches the 24%. So when I'm going to come down here and look at the projected difference in lifetime tax, you'll see there's a clear winner here in terms of doing this early on. Really made a huge impact on their lifetime tax. Now, this does assume they live to 92, so keep that in mind. That's always a variable you want to consider. because one of the cons for Roth conversions would be, in reality, you're actually doing these conversions in the years where you might actually want access to the money the most. So that is definitely a consideration for doing this, but in this case, it's only a 5-year window. That's much more of a case if you're going to do Roth conversions over 10, 15, 20 years. It's very difficult, but if you just really do it and you do it right, it can have a huge, massive impact on what the rest of your retirement looks like. So as you can see here, this blue shaded area is going to be the Roth case, and as I scroll my cursor over, this is every single year what the tax liability would actually be, and then over above it is adding those up over the lifetime of this retired couple. So you can see the gap only continues to grow as time goes on, meaning more and more taxes paid. And coming down here, now there's not a huge difference here in the IRMAA surcharges, but it definitely is a difference, right? So there's a lifetime difference of $20,000, which is not a small amount of money. So that's a positive, meaning doing those Roth conversions kept us low enough under IRMAA surcharges such that we've paid a lot less over the lifetime of our retirement for our Medicare premiums, Part B and D. And then lastly, we're looking at the total portfolio difference. Now this one is not going to have as much of an impact, but it's still a little bit more. Now remember what we said, the difference in Roth and pre-tax is you have to factor in the tax rate. That has already been factored in here. So again, it's not really how much you have, it's how much of that were you actually able to keep. And in this case, not only did you keep more, but you actually had more. So you won on both fronts. So there's over $114,000 more in the Roth converted portfolio versus the base case. Now here's an important piece, okay? And this one I think is probably one of the most important things to consider when it comes to looking at a Roth conversion. So if at 2025, Bob and Sue are sitting at 62 years old, I want you to think about this for a second. That means they would be 82 in 2045. Okay, so really they've got to make it to 80 to start seeing the difference in the break-even analysis, right? So you're paying things up front knowing that over time your portfolio value is going to pay dividends. Now this is only half the story, and I would say not even half the story, but realize this is how long it takes for your Roth value to surpass what your pre-tax value would have been. And again, it's much more about what you kept along the way versus just having more, because even if you left more, let's go back to this. If Bob and Sue have a legacy goal and they care a lot more about how this is passed down, it doesn't really matter that these portfolios, even if this base case would have been more, there's still going to be a tax implication in terms of who this is going to. Now there's one other thing I wanted to show you. And basically what you can think about here is this becomes more valuable. I'm scrolling here for a second. When you think about who's going to inherit these assets. Now if you have children and or grandchildren or kids that are going to be in a lower tax bracket, that would be one reason that you may not care as much about this Roth conversion strategy. The other thing is you have to be a fairly low spender. So let's think about this. So if we have, I want to go to our expenses. If we're spending $80,000 and we have a $4 million portfolio, if we just do the basic math on that, that is a 2% withdrawal rate. Now, as a starting point, as a base case, literally lowest case scenario, a portfolio income that could be sustained on that level would be roughly twice that. So basically, they are underspending and they're doing it on purpose. So if Bob and Sue said, actually, we don't want to live on $80,000, we want to live on $160,000. And by the way, we also want to give to our kids. Well, in that case, it might make a lot more sense to potentially do some of this over the course of their lifetime as opportunities present themselves, because living on that 160 doesn't allow for this 5-year window to do these bigger Roth conversions and not have to have so much income in the process, because that by itself is going to create more taxes. So the other thing is, if you are someone who has goals to live on a certain amount of income, and maybe you have charitable goals, so you are someone that gives to your church or another charitable organization, when you turn 70 and a half, you can give a sizable amount of money every year out of your tax deferred or traditional IRA account to directly to charity, and it's not taxable to you. So that's another way to lower your required minimum distribution amount. And then the other piece would just be, again, just recognizing that if your income needs are matching your after-tax withdrawal rate, then it's just the cost of doing business. So really, how much do you value legacy? What is the tax bracket of those that you're giving to? The other piece that I want to bring out in this video is, what is the age of your spouse? If you are someone who is 5, 10 more years older than your spouse, and you know that you're going to be passing these on to them, that can be a real reason to do Roth conversions early in retirement. Or if you know one spouse has medical condition that it's going to shorten their lifespan, you really want to try and get those assets to be not only over your lifetime, but the lifetime of your spouse. And the longer you can have tax-free income and growth, the better off you're going to be. So that is another reason to do Roth conversions. So hope this is helpful. Just kind of wanted to show you a base case. In this case, it would make sense for Bob and Sue to do some aggressive conversions early in retirement, knowing that they would have a large portfolio tax-free value to pass down to their beneficiaries when they are gone. And then one thing I didn't highlight here, but I do want to show you, is required minimum distribution. So for Bob and Sue, you can see the large difference between Roth and base, which only continues to grow as the portfolio grows. And the other thing too is you want to look at the makeup of the assets. I structured this case purposefully so that at the beginning their portfolio value is a total of this 3.5. So basically that is a combination of 3.5 plus 5. You've got those separately here. And then basically what you're going to do is, over time, this becomes what I would call more of a balanced portfolio. We didn't do enough conversions to completely eliminate all tax, but early on you can see within the first 5 years that crossover happens. So if the Roth assets are at 1.1 within 3 years, once you get to 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, it's really within the first 10 years that crossover happens. So right here at, that's what, 9 years. So we've got 2.5 in tax deferred and 2.4 in Roth. And then from there, those are going to grow together. And that's why you're seeing not that much of a difference in terms of what the base case would have been. It's because I tried to make this somewhat balanced. There are other scenarios where I might do a Roth conversion that eliminates tax deferred altogether. And that's okay, and that's very possible, but I tried to make this practical, because the other thing you have to remember is, how much did that conversion cost? Well, it cost $374,000. Well, where's that going to come from? It's got to come from from the taxable assets here, $500,000. So if you're someone who doesn't have a brokerage account, that's another reason not to convert to Roth. So to add to the discussion here, if you're someone that has $3.5 million in a pre-tax IRA, but you don't have any other forms of savings, it's going to be really, really hard for you to want to do those conversions and not only pay the tax now, but pay the tax out of the account that you pulled the money from in the first place. So you've got to gross it up just to pay the taxes. That's not very efficient. Now, there is a case that could be done, but it would have to be case by case, and it would have to make sense. So this is just a little bit of how I walk through what a Roth conversion could or would look like. Again, this is just a fictional scenario. Everybody's situation is different. And in reality, what I did was I did a Roth conversion to fill up a bracket, which is much more common, and a lot of times this is something that could be a case-by-case basis. It doesn't always have to be over 5 years. It could be over 10, 15, 20 years if you want to do some conversions over your lifetime. So hope this is helpful. Love to see a comment below. If you like this kind of content, love to do more of it. And I will see you next time.